It begins as a flicker, an unsettling thought, a crack in perception, a question of reality about what is real and what isn't, until it slowly escalates into chaos, followed by a complete disconnect from reality. This collection of poems explores a journey into madness, from questioning what that is to a complete breakdown of the mind. Each poem in this collection reflects a different shade of insanity, revealing the relationships between grief, passion, obsession, and love with madness. The first poem I will be reading is Much Madness is Divinest Sense by Emily Dickinson. This 8-line poem stands as opening to this collection as it challenges society's perception of madness. Dickinson presents madness not as an affliction, but as a form of clarity misunderstood by society. The use of dashes within the poem breaks the flow, encouraging the reader to pause at different points to reflect. The poem suggests that those deemed mad might be the most sane, but society punishes them because they are different. Much madness is divinest sense to a discerning eye. Much sense, the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority, in this, as all, prevail. Assent, and you are sane. Demur, you're straightway dangerous, and handled with a chain. In a Dark Time by Theodore Roeth is a 4-stanza poem that takes an unconventional view on the experience of suffering and madness. The poem explores how clarity can be gained from the experience of it. Metaphors and symbolism are used throughout the poem to convey this message. For example, darkness refers to a mental state, and the seeing eye is referencing an understanding. In the line, "What's madness but nobility of the soul?" it is suggested that madness is the highest form of the mind, unbound by constraints. As madness fully takes over in the final lines, full freedom and understanding is felt. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood, a lord of nature weeping to a tree. I live between the heron and the wren, beast of the hill and serpents of the den. What's madness but nobility of the soul, at odds with circumstance? The day's on fire. I know the purity of pure despair, my shadow pinned against a sweating wall. That place among the rocks, is it a cave or winding path? The edge is what I have. A steady storm of correspondences, a night flowing with birds, a ragged moon, and in broad daylight the midnight come again. A man goes far to find out what he is, death of the self in a long, tearless night, all natural shapes blazing unnatural light. Dark, dark my light, darker my desire. My soul, like some hot, heat-maddened summer fly, keeps buzzing at the sill. Which eye is I? A fallen man, I climb out of my fear. The mind enters itself, and God the mind, and one is one, free in the tearing world. Wind. One Need Not Be Chambered to Be Haunted by Emily Dickinson delves into the idea that madness is internal, hidden deep within the mind rather than something external that can be easily identified. Dickinson uses metaphors of being haunted to represent unseen torments of the mind, suggesting that mental anguish can be much worse than external sources of fear. The haunted house is a symbol of the mind, with its dark corridors representing the hidden spaces where madness lurks. The external ghosts of the poem represents the experiences that are less dangerous than what lurks within the mind. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Far safer of a midnight meeting, external ghost, than an interior confronting that wider host. Far safer through an abbey gallop, the stones of case that moonless one's own self encounter in lonesome place. Our self behind our self concealed should startle most. Assassin, hid in our apartment, be horrors least. The prudent carries a revolver, he bolts the door, overlooking a superior spectre more near. Mad Girl's Love Song by Sylvia Plath is a 6-stanza poem that represents the psychological confusion that arises when reality becomes distorted. Questioning reality can make you feel like you are going insane. It also could be the start of a spiral into madness. Mad Girl's Love Song explores this experience using alliteration, rhyming, and the repetition of "I think I made you up inside my head" throughout the poem. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I lift my lids and all is born again. I think I made you up inside my head. The stars go waltzing out in blue and red, and arbitrary blackness gallops in. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I dreamed that you bewitched me into bed, and snug me moonstruck kissed me quite insane. I think I made you up inside my head. God topples from the sky, hell's fires fade, exit seraphim and Satan's man. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I fancied you'd return the way you said, but I grow old and I forget your name. I think I made you up inside my head. I should have loved a thunderbird instead. At least when spring comes, they roar back again. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I think I made you up inside my head. Mad Song by William Blake captures the restlessness and paranoia of someone slipping into madness. The weather in the poem is symbolic of the narrator's mental state. It reflects the inner chaos and inability to escape the torment of one's own thoughts. The light in the poem represents a new day that the narrator does not want to face. The lines used within the poem are short, creating a sense of urgency and desperation. The wild winds weep, and the night is a cold. Come hither, sleep, in my griefs enfold. But lo, the morning peeps over the eastern steeps, and the rustling birds of dawn the earth do scorn. Lo, to the vault of paved heaven, with sorrow fraught, my notes are driven, they strike the ear of night, make weep the eyes of day, they make mad the roaring winds, and with tempests play. Like a fiend in a cloud with howling woe, after night I do crowd, and with night will I go. I turn my back to the east, from whence comforts have increased, for light doth seize my brain with frantic pain. I Felt a Funeral in My Brain by Emily Dickinson. Here, Dickinson's imagery of a funeral serves as a metaphor for the death of the mind. As the poem progresses, the narrator experiences the slow unraveling of thought, with the funeral procession symbolizing a descent into madness. The repetition of "and" at the start of the lines creates a sense of never-ending continuation, as if the speaker's mind is being pulled deeper into the chaos. By the end, the speaker's complete disconnect from reality is made evident, mirroring the finality of the madness. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service, like a drum, kept beating, till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul, with those same boots of lead again, then space began to toll. As all the heavens were a bell, and being but an ear, and I, in silence, some strange race, wrecked, solitary, here. And then a plank of reason broke, and I dropped down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. The Haunted Palace by Edgar Allan Poe uses the decay of a once beautiful palace to symbolize the decline of the mind. The poem begins with imagery of angels and seraphs, which represents peace and clarity. Repetition of words such as flowing, flowing, flowing add emphasis to the imagery presented to this positive state. As the palace deteriorates, it mirrors the deterioration of the mind, eventually leading to a state of insanity. In the greenest of our valleys, by good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, radiant palace, reared its head. In the monarch thought's dominion, it stood there. Never seraph spread opinion over fabric half so fair. Banners yellow, glorious, golden, on its roof did float and flow. This, all this, was in the olden time long ago. And every gentle air that dallied in that sweet day, along the ramparts, plumed and pallid, a winged odor went away. Wanderers in the happy valley through two luminous windows saw spirits moving musically to a lute's well-tuned law. Round about the throne where sitting Porphyrogene, in state his glory well befitting, the ruler of the realm was seen, and all with pearl and ruby glowing was fair the palace door, through which came flowing, 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 and sparkling evermore, a troop of echoes whose sweet duty was but to sing, in voices of surpassing beauty, the wit and wisdom of their king. But evil things, in robes of sorrow, assailed the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him, desolate. And round about his home the glory that blushed and bloomed is but a dim resembled story of the old time entombed. And travelers now within that valley through the red litten windows see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody, while, like a ghastly rapid river, through the pale door, a hideous throng rush out forever and laugh, but smile no more. In Porphyria's Lover by Robert Browning, the narrator's obsessive love spirals into murder, a moment where madness consumes the individual. The narrator's desire to preserve his ideal love leads to a violent act, showing how obsession and delusion can lead to complete detachment from reality. There is also an irony about how calm the narrator is through the violent situation. The poem contains a single stanza, and the indentations used in the poem are consistent with the A-B-A-B-B rhyme scheme that is present. The rain set early into night. The sullen wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break, when glided in Porphyria straight. She shut the cold out and the storm, and kneeled and made the cheerless grate blaze up and all the cottage warm, which done she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hat, and let the damp hair fall. And last she sat down by my side, and called me, with no voice replied. She put my arm about her waist, and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping made my cheek lie there, and spread o'er all her yellow hair, murmuring how she loved me. She, too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride and Werner ties dissever, and give herself to me forever. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could to night's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale, for love of her and all in vain, so she was come through wind and rain. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud, at last I knew, Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew, while I debated what to do. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do, in all her hair, and one long yellow string I wound 3 times her little throat around, and strangled her. No pain she felt. I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily opted her lids again. Laughed the blue eyes without strain, and I tightened next the tress. About her neck, her cheek once more, blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head, which droops down it still, the smiling rosy little head, so glad it has it utmost will, that all it scorned at once is fled, and I its love am gained instead. Porphyria's love, she guessed not how, her darling one wish would be heard. And thus we sit together now. And all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. Love in the Asylum by Dylan Thomas introduces the experience of being touched by madness. The narrator lives in an asylum and is introduced to a mad girl that will share a room with him. Through enjambment and disorienting imagery, the poem illustrates the collision of love and insanity. The line, "On the madhouse boards wore thin by my walking tears," suggests a prolonged affliction and stay at the asylum. This makes the reader question whether the mad girl is real or if she's a delusion. A stranger has come to share my room in the house, not right in the head. A girl mad as birds, bolting the night of the door with her arm, her plume, straight in the mazed bed. She deludes the heaven-proof house with entering clouds, yet she deludes with walking the nightmarish room. At large as the dead, or rides the imagined oceans of the male wards. She is come possessed, who admits the delusive light through the bouncing wall, possessed by the skies. She sleeps in the narrow trough, yet she walks the dust, yet raves at will. On the madhouse boards worn thin by my walking tears, and taken by light in her arms at long rest, dear last, I may without fail suffer the first vision that set fire to the stars. The Mad Gardener's Song by Lewis Carroll. This poem marks the final stage in the progression of madness and uses a rhyme scheme of A, B, C, B, D, B. The gardener's delusions fluctuate between reality and hallucination as he mistakes everyday objects for absurd things, such as a buffalo as his wife's niece. Carroll's use of absurdity creates a sense of disassociation where logic has completely unraveled. He thought he saw an elephant that practiced on a fife. He looked again and found it was a letter from his wife. At length I realized, he said, the bitterness of life. He thought he saw a buffalo upon the chimney piece. He looked again and found it was his sister's husband's niece. Unless you leave this house, he said, I'll send for the police. He thought he saw a rattlesnake that questioned him in Greek. He looked again and found it was the middle of next week. The one thing I regret, he said, is that it cannot speak. He thought he saw a banker's clerk descending from the bus. He looked again and found it was a hippopotamus. If this should stay to dine, he said, there won't be much for us. He thought he saw a kangaroo that worked a coffee mill. He looked again and found it was a vegetable pill. Where I swallow this, he said, I should be very ill. He thought he saw a coach and four that stood beside his bed. He looked again and found it was a bear without a head. Poor thing, he said, poor silly thing, it's waiting to be fed. He thought he saw an albatross that fluttered round the lamp. He looked again and found it was a penny postage stamp. You'd best be getting home, he said, the nights are very damp. He thought he saw a garden door that opened with a key. He looked again and found it was a double rule of 3. And all this is a mystery, he said, as clear as day to me. He thought he saw an argument that proved he was the Pope. He looked again and found it was a bar of mottled soap. A fact so dread, he faintly said, extinguishes all hope.